Welcome into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out fullpresscoverage.com for great podcasts, articles, you name it, they got it. We are there. We are on Spotify. We are on YouTube now. If you go to my YouTube channel, YouTube/Jet Stryer, that's the YouTube version of the show. We don't have flashy graphics yet, but we do have our faces, and that should be enough for you right now. Except for Sap, you said you need to work on creating some sort of like a set in your background, right?
Yeah, I'm going to create a set, or you can have a virtual background on Zoom. So I may work on that. Maybe I'll just hang some pictures behind me, or just bring in the books so that I look like an intellectual, because everybody's got to show off the books that they have.
That is true. What is it with the books? For so many people, that's like their background is books.
I guess they just want to make sure that everybody knows they read, which is great. We all read. I've never been someone that likes to read novels. I'll be honest with you. I'm more into I like long form journalism. So I'll read like a 37-page piece on whatever. I like that type of stuff, but novels don't really do it for me. But yeah, I've got plenty of books. I mean, when we were at the Herald together, we used to always get books sent to us, and then we had the author on, which was pretty cool. Then I would get the books and give them away for Christmas. I don't know if my, relatives really wanted those books, but it was something to put in a bag to give to them at Christmas. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to bring the books in. I'm tight for space where I am. So most of my books and my DVDs of all the movies I have are in storage at my niece's house in her attic. So I don't want to clutter my little space here. So maybe I'll just go with some pictures hanging up in the background.
That's nice of your niece to be devoting some space to all your clutter.
She's great to me. No one better than her.
Yeah, I would actually think it's interesting you say the DVDs thing, because I feel like that would be a more interesting thing to put in your background than books. Like, oh, what movies does he or she like? Like, what do they have on their movie shelf instead of?
Maybe I'll do that instead, Jet. That's a good idea. They'll come away with, this guy is obviously very dark, very deep, somewhat of a psycho, because you're going to see obviously a lot of Kubrick films behind me, whether it be A Clockwork Orange, Dr. Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I just find that more interesting than the books that you are pretending to read that are it's pretty fraudulent that you haven't read all those books. Everybody's got War and Peace behind them and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the 17th
Bible.
Tale, the Bible. Yes, Donald Trump's second favorite book behind The Art of the Deal. But or you put behind you 17 volume set of Abraham Lincoln, so that you look like you're a historian. But we'll work on that, because my mug takes up most of the screen. But once we get whether it be the virtual or the real background, then we can kind of zoom out a little bit and show the rest of the room here. I'm just saying, so I gotta be careful.
I think you're onto something with let's normalize people putting movies behind them instead of books. I think that's the we're in the 2020s now. Let's just admit that everybody watches more movies than they do read books. I think it's time to call it on. Now, I'm not saying don't read books. I'm just saying that it's more likely the person has watched a bunch of movies than read a bunch of books.
Or I can just have a giant movie poster of Trainwreck starring LeBron James. I think that could go right behind me too.
You'd be the only person in America to own that.
I don't even think LeBron owns that poster.
Well, thank you for mentioning LeBron James, because while he is out, the Lakers have added somebody on the buyout market. So he has a new teammate, one Andre Drummond, who has decided to say, I'm actually going to join the Lakers. Those other teams I was looking at, just as we said on the podcast the other day, kind of fraudulent, saw right through that one. He decided to go out to sunny California and join a team with title aspirations, as opposed to joining, the Celtics, Hornets, or Knicks, which were never really in the mix, but he made it seem like they were. Ultimately, he signs where everybody thought he was going to sign, and he goes to LA. Is this a big addition for the Lakers, or is it something that maybe is a little bit overrated because of the name?
I think it's a great addition for the Lakers, Jet, because obviously Anthony Davis is going to be out probably another 2 to 3 weeks. LeBron will probably be out another 3 to 4 weeks. They've won a couple games in a row. They didn't beat anybody of significance, right? I mean, one of the teams they beat was Cleveland. So, they won 2 games. They want to stay in that top 6 in the Western Conference, avoid being in the 7 through 10 one-game play-in scenario. So I think they look pretty solid there. So Drummond can help them maintain some normalcy over the next 2 to 3 weeks if they can play 500 ball till Anthony Davis comes back in. Also, I think he'll fit in fine with Anthony Davis, who prefers playing the 4. So you'd have Drummond at the 5, Anthony Davis at the 4. LeBron has his own position, but let's call him the 3. And then you got Dennis Schroeder and KCP. That's your starting backcourt. That's a really good starting lineup. And now you move Gasol back to the bench where I think he belongs, where he can be kind of a spot player. Then you've got your other guys, Kuzma, Wesley Matthews, Caruso. That would formulate a pretty solid bench for the Lakers. I think it's a great move. The guy can still rebound. He's averaging 13 and a half rebounds a game this year alone, playing less than 30 minutes per game. I mean, this is one of the best rebounders of his era, right? I mean, he's 69th all-time in rebounding in the history of the league, and he's only 27 years old. When I was doing research on him, I thought he was 30. He's only 27, Jet, and he's got 8,625 career rebounds. This is a guy who could end up in the top 10 or 15 all-time in rebounds. So he's got that one skill that he's phenomenal at. And the Lakers, when they won the title a year ago, a big reason was they dominated the boards against pretty much every other team. Now, looking forward to the playoffs, there may be some series where Drummond doesn't play much, right? I mean, if you get to the NBA Finals and they're playing Brooklyn and the Nets go with, say, Durant at the 5 or Blake Griffin at the 5, and those guys can go out and take 3-pointers, or even Lamarcus Aldridge, who I'm sure we'll talk about momentarily. If he goes out to the 5 and starts draining threes, then maybe Drummond is almost useless at that point. But there's going to be some teams in the West where I think he's going to be a factor, namely, say, Denver or even the Clippers, where he can, maybe be somewhat of a rim protector. He's not a great defender, but he's a big body. So I think it's a really good move by the Lakers. He is a big name, but the man can still rebound, and rebounds still matter, as I said in a prior podcast. As Pat Riley said through the 80s, no rebounds, no rings. And I think Riley knows a lot about basketball.
Yeah, it's, I think that the Lakers certainly have always been a destination for these guys, so it's not a surprise that he ended up there. And fortunately for LA, he does fill a hole that they happen to have, is that, the position he plays is a position of need for them. So it's a zero risk signing for the Lakers, which is always, the best kind of signings is when you're not giving up anything in return. And if it doesn't work out, harm, no foul. So it's really, you can't say it's a home run for the Lakers, because there's a reason that he was bought out and not, still on the Cavs. And there's a reason that the season before he was traded for a bag of peanuts. But he certainly can still rebound. He's not going to be asked to do much in the way of offense, I would think, especially once Davis and LeBron come back. I think he's averaging around 17 points a game. That should go way the heck down, I would imagine. They probably don't want him to have that many touches offensively, because that disrupts the flow that they want to have. He doesn't shoot from range at all. All of his points are basically dunks or layups, and he's more of a traditional back to the basket center, where, he'll take the ball and pump fake, and it'll be, 12 or 15 seconds off the shot clock. So that's not something that the Lakers offense would really want them to do. It's more about, spacing and let LeBron sort of figure out where everybody's supposed to be. And Anthony Davis can play really anywhere offensively, which is why he's so good. He's 7 feet tall and he can play anywhere offensively. So I think that the fact that it fills the need is the biggest part for the Lakers. And the rebounding is key. Absolutely. And I think that it'll actually help them stem this tide when LeBron and AD are out, that it does give them somebody. And so the scoring might not go down right now because they're going to need scoring out of him. But when LeBron and Anthony Davis come back, I think that it'll change in his role and the offense will change. But I certainly see him as an upgrade over Gasol. I don't know if he's an upgrade over Harrell, but he's certainly taller.
Yeah, Harrell's a guy that you can kind of fit in with different types of lineups. I mean, Harrell's 6'7". He plays the 5 a lot. He's an energy guy, but there's nothing that doesn't say that you can have a front court of Harrell, Anthony Davis, and LeBron James closing for you, because Drummond is a liability late in games because he can't hit free throws. He's a 50% free throw shooter. He is a total liability as a free throw shooter.
Right. Then you have two liabilities, him and LeBron.
LeBron does struggle at the free throw line, which is, kind of like his Achilles heel, which is just, I have my theories why he struggles with the foul line. I think he overthinks the process. Just go to the line, take your shots, hit him. No, it's not an excuse. It's an explanation. I think
don't like
he
it.
is so analytical that instead of just going to the line, dribbling it twice and hitting the shot, he overprocesses. And that's why most of his game-winning shots come when they gain possession with 3 or 4 seconds left. There's not a lot of time for him to have to overthink the situation. It was something that people said about Peyton Manning at times, where he would overthink when he got to the line of scrimmage. Sometimes Aaron Rodgers does that, whereas Tom Brady, keeps it simple, stupid, so that he goes forward in what he wants to do. But the offensive contribution from Andre Drummond that we're going to see, it basically going to be about lobs and putbacks. That's about it, which is going to be just fine, because once Davis and LeBron are back, those are the guys you run the offense through. And Dennis Schrader is a guy who can really, also run the offense as well. So they should be in fine shape going forward.
Yeah, so he was the biggest name on the buyout market, certainly, and I think everybody really expected him to sign with the Lakers from the get-go. I said this last week when the list of teams came out. It was just, you could see right through it. It was pretty fraudulent because he wasn't going to play as big of a role on any of the other teams, maybe the Knicks, than he was on the Lakers. And also the Lakers offer him the best chance of winning a championship, the best case at showcasing his talent in a deep playoff run to get a contract next year. And it's, a nice little couple-month vacation being in warm, sunny Los Angeles. So none of the other options made sense for me.
No.
So Lakers, I think it's a great place for him to be in terms of trying to add to his value as he hits the free agent market this offseason. And it's a great signing for the Lakers to get somebody for nothing that fills a need. So I like it all around. As far as an unexpected signing, we all knew Lamarcus Aldridge was going to hit the buyout market, but everybody thought he was going to the Miami Heat. He changes course, and he ends up with the Brooklyn Nets as the rich get richer. And the two title favorites now have both added the two best players off the buyout market. So what do you think Lamarcus Aldridge offers the Brooklyn Nets? Same questions I asked you about Drummond to the Lakers.
Another option. I think it's more necessary that the Lakers got Drummond because of their injury situation right now. Although we still don't know the extent of the injury to Kevin Durant. Is he just going to take the rest of the regular season off and be ready for the postseason? If that's the case, then so be it. Kevin Durant's played 19 games in the last 2 years. So although I think he's the second best player in basketball behind LeBron, there has to be some concern with that, right? I mean, this hamstring, groin, Achilles from 2 years ago, that whole lower body
I get the
area
sense that
got to be a concern.
Fine, and they're probably just,
I would
like you said,
think so, right?
him.
And look, he could probably score 25 without moving, right? I mean, he could just walk down the court, spot up and shoot and get 25. He's that damn talented. It's a good move for the Nets because now you have LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin as guys that you can start them. They give you some versatility. Blake Griffin can play a little bit of the 5. Aldridge can play some of the 5. So if they want to go with a heavy offensive lineup, they can have either one of those guys at the 5. Durant can play the 4. Jeff Green is a versatile front court guy as well. And of course, you got Harden and Kyrie in the backcourt. So it's a scary team to try to face. Aldridge, to me, looks like he's certainly closer to the clubhouse than Andre Drummond. Aldridge is 35. Again, not an athletic player. He's more of a skilled guy. His numbers have gone down this year, as we can tell, but he's also seemed to have checked out with the San Antonio Spurs. This year, he's averaging 13.7 points and 4.5 rebounds per game. Shooting 46% from the floor, 36% from 3. So I think he's a guy that can be another piece for the Nets. And look, when you got someone like LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin, if you get to the Eastern Conference Finals and you're battling, say, Philadelphia, and it's a pretty tight series, one of those or both of those guys at some point can steal a game for you, right? I mean, in a fourth quarter, they can hit a big shot, make a big play. Remember the Celtics when they played the Cavaliers in the 2008 playoffs in the second round? It was P.J. Brown hit a huge shot in Game 7.
Huge shot
in Game 7. That was the game where Pierce and LeBron were just going mano a mano. It was so similar to Bird, Dominique Wilkins in 1988. And I remember P.J. Brown hitting a huge, I'd say a 15-footer from the left side, the left wing.
Saved them. Mm-hmm.
Saved them. If he misses that shot, who knows what happens in that series. So I think that Aldridge and Griffin can offer that, because they're big-time players. or they were big time players. They're not what they used to be, but we're talking about two guys that have been to 5 or more All-Star games, and now they're not the players they were. But there's also not the same responsibility because that team is run by Durant, Harden, Kyrie Irving, pick your order, and then everybody else is going to play a subservient role. And that's the thing that they're going to have to accept because they've always been the guy on their teams.
Right.
Now they're the 4th and 5th option. And I haven't even mentioned Joe Harris, who's a dead-eye knockdown three-point shooter, who adds another piece to it. So another good move by the Nets. I know a lot of people are pushing back. I saw earlier Stephen A. Smith and Kendrick Perkins were going at it with Max, about how they're turned off that these two players who just 2 years ago were considered cornerstone guys to their franchise all of a sudden are just going to the Nets to try to win a championship. And, Max brought up Karl Malone and Gary Payton going to the Lakers, but Payton and Karl Malone started for the Lakers in 2003, 2004, and they were better players career-wise than Aldridge and Blake Griffin. So they kind of had a little bit more leeway when it comes to that. But look, they're chasing championships. That's what guys are doing. Aldridge has made over $200 million in his career already. You look at Andre Drummond's made about $130 million. So they're set financially. They'd like to add a ring. And because we've all put pressure on players to get a ring, right? The first thing we talk about, or the second thing we talk about when we talk about Karl Malone and Charles Barkley is what? Never won a championship.
Yeah.
And those two guys are better than all of these players we're talking about right now that have moved on from the buyout market. I mean, it's not even close. But Blake Griffin, Lamarcus Aldridge, maybe winning a championship puts them over the top to be Hall of Fame players. I mean, are they thinking that far down the road? They've made plenty of money. So that's
I don't
be a
know
big
that
reason.
I don't know that it's the Hall of Fame more than just having that. They're competitive guys. Everybody's in the NBA is competitive, and just in winning a ring that's the goal you want.
Yes.
Some money might be the priority, and I'm sure earlier in their career it was, but now that they've made all the money that they've made, I think they, as the competitive aspect of them and saying, my career is winding down, I'd like to be on a winning team, a team that actually, pulls it off. And it turns me off too. I don't like that all these guys are going to, the same teams and that everybody's congregating on two teams and that the finals seems super predictable. I don't think that's fun. I think part of what was so fun about the bubble last year was that it was so wide open. I mean, no one thought the Heat were coming out of it and they came out of it. And that makes sports better when it's unpredictable. And this is going back to what it was just a couple of years ago, where it was the Cavs and Warriors every year, and you could write it in Sharpie before the season started. So I don't like that aspect of it. And talking about Aldridge specifically, yes, he is probably closer to, as you said, the clubhouse than Andre Drummond, but he also still offers more of a modern game than Drummond at this point because he can shoot from range. He isn't a black hole down in the paint. He's not as good of a rebounder, obviously, and never has been, but he's a more varied offensive player than Drummond, skill set wise. So, like you said, he could certainly steal them a couple of games. I do think it's a good signing. I think he's probably, just as we've seen with Blake Griffin, going to be reinvigorated by playing for a team that's, competing for something here. And obviously the Spurs weren't the mess that the Pistons were, but it's not like anybody expected the Spurs to go anywhere this year. So I think it's hard as a player who's been in the league for a long time to take stock of where you're at in terms of the team and say, this team's not really going anywhere. What's the point of me putting in my, full effort? And then suddenly you're on a team with championship aspirations and, you start playing a little bit differently. We've seen it with Blake Griffin. You've seen it countless times over the years with other guys in similar situations. And so I wouldn't be shocked if Aldridge starts picking it up more than he was in San Antonio. So I think it's a great signing. The issue for Brooklyn when they acquired James Harden was depth was going to be an issue. Now they've pretty much rectified that. They're not the deepest team in the world, but they're certainly deep enough to win a championship. They're not going to have a bad bench. And so Aldridge just adds to that. And I think that the part where people get frustrated with, adding Griffin and adding Aldridge is that you're just adding luxury to a team that didn't
Mhm.
need it, and this adding Drummond too. These teams, the Lakers and the Nets, everybody thought before those additions they were the finalist favorites, and now they've just added more. So I get being turned off by it. Personally, I hate it. I do think the NBA needs to take a look at the buyout market and limiting teams to one buyout player in the. I don't know that they'd ever be able to do that because the Players Association would push back on it because there's one less team to employ somebody. But it does seem like it really sucks when you have three guys who have been bought out who are kind of premier names: Griffin, Aldridge, and Drummond, and two of them have ended up on Brooklyn. It just I don't know that it's good for the league to have the finals so telegraphed.
What if, well, in the 80s, we pretty much saw the Celtics or the 76ers in the finals against the Lakers. That worked okay in the 80s. In the 90s, Jordan was always in the finals. And then in the 2010s, LeBron's always been in the finals. So, I mean, the league has always been about this. I mean, the Celtics won 11 championships in 13 years. The only decade that you didn't have a dominant team was the 70s. No one repeated between 1969, when the Celtics won back-to-back with Bill Russell as the player coach, all the way up to the 1988 Lakers. So it was almost 20 years between back-to-back, and now it seems normal to go back-to-back. I mean, Jordan went back-to-back-to-back twice. Kobe went back-to-back. LeBron's gone back-to-back. So that's the way things happen now in the NBA. Golden State probably would have won 3 in a row if Durant and Klay Thompson don't get hurt in the finals 2 years ago.
Probably.
Yeah, but I mean, if the Celtics were in a position where they were the dominant team, would you say the same thing? If
No,
Lamarcus
I'd love it
Aldridge
as
and
a
Blake
as a
Griffin,
Celtics fan,
as a Celtic fan,
but as an NBA fan, I don't think it's great for the league. And like you're saying, in the 80s, and it was the Celtics and Lakers, and that's true. But it was a more of an organic feeling, that they did it through shrewder moves. Versus now, it just feels like, okay, players just are all friends with each other. They want to be on the same team. They want to be in the major markets, or more specifically, recently it's been want to be in a warm market in Miami or Los Angeles. So I do feel like it's changed a little bit, and I also feel like we've talked about this before, Seth, how talented the league is right now, and with the amount of talent you have in the league, for it to still be a telegraphed finals, I just don't like how that plays itself out.
Yeah, I mean, there's no mystery there. But when we get to the finals, it should be a real interesting finals between the Lakers and the Nets. But in the 80s, the Lakers and Celtics constantly added talent throughout the season, not just in the offseason. But in the offseason, one year the Celtics bring in Dennis Johnson. They win the NBA championship. 2 years later, they bring in Bill Walton as a sixth man. They win the NBA championship. The Lakers were constantly bringing players in. Their backup center, when they won back-to-back titles in the late 80s, was Michael Thompson, father of Klay Thompson, who, by the way, was the first pick in the 1978 draft. In the early 80s, they brought in Bob McAdoo, who'd been a league MVP and led the league in scoring 3 times 10 years before he joined the Lakers. So those two teams, it almost felt like in the 80s, there were about 4 or 5 well-run teams in the NBA. The Celtics, the Lakers, the 76ers, and to a lesser degree, say the Bucks and the Spurs, because they always kind of dipped in and out, playing at least in the conference championship. Now, I think there's more well-run teams. I think even Oklahoma City, which right now is a train wreck, but they're setting things up for the future with all these draft picks. So there's more well-run teams. It's just that the contracts are so huge that people want to get off of contracts as quickly as they can to move on. The whole buyout thing kind of is strange to me. Like, are they going to do this in baseball at some point? Let's say that, in 5 years, Mike Trout looks like he's a shell of himself. The Angels still have to pay him, $35 million a year for 7 years. Is there going to be a buyout option in baseball? No, that's not going to happen because that Players Association is so strong. So that whole buyout thing to me is kind of strange. Yeah, I mean, now the players have a choice to go where they want to when they're bought out. And they picked the 2 best teams in basketball. But it was done a little differently in the 80s, but still the same way, which led actually to one of our listeners, posing a question to me. Is this Nets team now the most accomplished team we've seen since the merger? When you look at the totality of their roster, they're not all in their prime right now.
Right.
Obviously, Griffin and Aldridge are past their prime. Durant, when healthy, still in his prime. Harden and Kyrie are right in their prime. Is this, since you've been following basketball, is this the most accomplished roster you've ever seen? Not looking at them all in their prime, but in terms of what they've all accomplished, because all five of these guys, Jed, have been to 5 or more All-Star games. That hasn't happened since the 2010, 2011 Celtics, who had 5 players who eventually would have played in 5 All-Star games. Obviously, Garnett, Allen, Pierce, Rondo, and they had Shaq on that team, who was, well washed up. But you can make a case this Brooklyn team's as accomplished as any we've seen. The only thing is they haven't accomplished yet is win a championship.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'd still probably shade towards that Lakers with Karl Malone and Gary Payton, and they didn't win a title.
Yeah, good point.
But in terms of just accomplishment, like those, Shaq, Kobe, Malone, and Payton were all no-brainer first ballot Hall of Famers. All with maybe the exception of Gary Payton, now top 50 players. But you could certainly make an argument that Gary Payton's a top 50 player of all time.
You can make an argument, yeah. I mean,
but the other guys are all
guys, yeah.
Easy top 50 guys. I mean, Shaq and Kobe are top 20 guys, and Karl Malone probably top 25, top 30.
I'd say top 20 as much as I don't like him. He's definitely a top 20. I mean, the guy's second all-time leading scorer.
Right.
I didn't even think of that team because they didn't win. And
it's weird to say because they didn't win, but you're asking me the most accomplished just looking at it, and they're obviously Malone and Payton were past their prime. But if you're just taking the totality of their careers, then yeah, because it's similar now in that Griffin and Aldridge are obviously past their prime. And I was looking this up, and there's an article on NBC SAP about just this, and it says the Nets are the first team in NBA history with 6 players who've made multiple All-NBA teams. Durant has 9, Harden 7, Griffin 5, Aldridge 5, DeAndre Jordan 3, and Kyrie Irving 2. They've combined for 31 All-NBA appearances. Only the 2004 Lakers, the team we just mentioned,
right?
They had 38 between Malone, O'Neal, Payton, and Kobe Bryant. And the Celtics in 2011 had 32 between Shaq, Garnett, Pierce, Jermaine O'Neal, and Ray Allen. Yep. Funny enough, though, Sap, those 2 teams, no championships. It says, goes on to say, none of the 4 teams with at least 30 All-NBA selections have won an NBA championship. So take that for what you will. But if you are looking at this Nets team in terms of accomplishment, you could certainly make the case that they are one of, if not the most accomplished team. The reason I would push back on it a little bit and say that Lakers team, or even that Celtics team, because they only won 1 championship, is that they have Durant, who's won 2 titles, Kyrie, who's won 1, Harden has won 0, Aldridge has won 0, DeAndre Jordan's won 0, and Griffin's won 0. So
yeah, see, that's a great point, Jeff, because I could go back. I'm being older, and I'm sure if your dad's listening, he probably would nod his head when I bring these 2 teams up. But the 85-86 Celtics, because you had Parrish, McHale, Bird, arguably the greatest front court in the history of the sport. You had Dennis Johnson, who's a Hall of Famer, as your point guard. Danny Ainge made an all-star team a few years later. He was kind of like the redheaded stepchild on that team, but he was a damn good player. And then you had Bill Walton and Scott Wedman coming off the bench, and Wedman was a multiple-time all-star. Bill Walton, if he had been healthy throughout his whole career, instead of us arguing about who's the greatest center among Russell, Jabbar, and Chamberlain, we'd be arguing about Russell, Jabbar, Chamberlain, and Bill Walton. I think that's how great he was at his peak. Also, the Lakers in 86, 87, you had Kareem still playing at a very high level, Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Michael Thompson was the backup center. And, that was a loaded team. But I'll actually go back a few years before, and here's another team that didn't win the title. The 82-83 Lakers actually got swept by the 76ers in the finals. That team had Jamal Wilkes and Bob McAdoo to go along with Norm Nixon, Magic Johnson, and Karim Abdul-Jabbar and James Worthy. I mean, that's talk about
3 guys who won the MVP award on the same team.
Right. That team was absolutely loaded, but they got swept by the Sixers, who, by the way, also had a super team, right? Moses Malone, Dr. J, Andrew Toney, Mo Cheeks, all in the Hall. Well, Tony's not in the Hall of Fame. He was headed in that direction, but had injuries. Bobby Jones was coming off the bench. He's a Hall of Famer. So
here's what I might say then,
We've seen these great teams in the history of sports. the only thing is the Lakers and Celtics had already won championships. This team
Right.
hasn't. So we got to
So
see, is James Harden going to step up in the playoffs, or is he going to suck like he normally does?
I think that I might say this is the best collection of individual talents in their prime
There
on
you
a
go.
team, on one team.
There you go. Perfect.
Because we've talked about this plenty of times before, that the Warriors were a better constructed team, but in terms of the individual talents who are in their prime on this Nets team, it's the best collection of that.
Yep.
Because I do believe that Durant, Kyrie, and James Harden are all in the very prime of their career. So I think that is unique as to opposed to when you look at like that 04 Lakers team. Peyton and Malone were well past their prime. Shaq was just exiting it. Kobe was firmly in it. That 11 Celtics team, Shaq was way the hell out of his prime. Garnett was out of his prime. Pierce was just out of his prime. Jermaine O'Neal was like a bit player on that team, and Ray Allen was past his prime too. And then you look at some other teams, like they said, the 2013 Lakers too had Kobe, Nash, Howard, Pau Gasol, and Metta World Peace. Basically everybody except for Dwight Howard and maybe Pau Gasol were out of their prime on that team. Barkley, Hakeem, and Scottie Pippen on the 99 Rockets. So it's unique in that these three players who are the marquee guys of that Nets team are all still in the prime of their careers. It puts it a lot closer to that Warriors team that we saw in the past decade be dominant than these other teams we're talking about with multiple appearances in the All-Stars or All-NBA teams. Is that this is a little different because these guys are all still so good. And the closest guy to being out of his prime is probably Durant, who's the best of the three of them.
Right, because of the injury concerns, and he's also the oldest. So there is that concern. But like I said, he could score 25 a night just standing in a corner. I think he could still accomplish that. But a lot of those teams you brought up, Jet, didn't win a championship. And this is one that's still very delicate. As talented as the Brooklyn Nets are, it's still very delicate because it could implode. We know Kyrie Irving has a tendency of screwing things up. He's a marvelous player. I think he's probably the most skilled guy in the league. To do what he does at 6'2", it's breathtaking. Harden is a leading MVP candidate. We know all about Kevin Durant, but it could blow up in the postseason. Mike D'Antoni is the assistant coach to Steve Nash. Normally, I don't weigh coaching into the playoffs all that much unless maybe Greg Popovich is involved in a series, and he's not going anywhere near the finals anytime soon in San Antonio. But the Mike D'Antoni system, which I think Nash has somewhat adopted, proves that it doesn't necessarily work in the postseason. Now, it didn't have Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant with James Harden in Houston, but it did have Chris Paul for a couple of years, who I love as a player. And Russell Westbrook, who I think is a tough fit with any team because he's kind of his own guy. But it could implode because it's still a very volatile situation in Brooklyn. The health of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Kyrie could retire in 2 weeks. It wouldn't shock me. And he joins the circus. I'm being a bit hyperbolic here, but none of that would really shock us, would it? I mean, Kyrie
no, he's a weird
retiring.
Guy.
I'm going into acting full time. I'm going to play Hamlet. I'm going to try to, be a better actor than Daniel Day-Lewis. Like, if that came out of his mouth, I would not be totally shocked.
Yeah, you don't know what's going to come out of it. He's just a strange guy, and that's kind of the way he likes it. Honestly, is he likes to be the guy who people are constantly guessing. Well, what's he thinking? That he likes. It's not that he likes the attention. I do think that there's to some degree, but he certainly likes the perception that he's like mysterious and this deep thinker. So, I mean,
he's a troll. Right?
He's a troll. Too. We could do. I mean, I could do 10 hours complaining about Kyrie Irving and his personality, but
I won't let you do that.
It's it's an interesting conversation, and I do think that they've quickly become the villains in the NBA.
Yes.
And that Steve Nash was asked that question last night, and it said their team is embracing it, and I don't think anybody is really rooting for the Nets to win outside of Brooklyn, whatever fans they do have. again, it leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. It's like all these guys are joining up. I have not understood why Durant is so on board with this, because this seems to be the thing that bothers him the most, is the perception that he needed to join a super team to win a title. And that's why I thought he left Golden State in the first place, was to get rid of that and win a championship without that hanging over his head. And now it's this, if he wins a title, it's going to be the same crap that people were saying. And I'm not saying that they're right or wrong. Personally, I think that they're right. It was the titles don't look as good for him because they were the aid of a team that had won 73 games the year prior.
Mhm.
And listen, a title is a title. I'm not taking it away from him, but I don't understand why he has control over the moves that the team makes. I don't understand why he's so on board with this again, because he's going to get the same shit that people were giving him, that he's been upset about for years.
If he went to Brooklyn with just Kyrie Irving and won 1 or 2 titles, I think people would be cool with that, right? It's when you added James Harden, who, quite frankly, is actually having the best season of the 3 players and is a top 3 MVP candidate. If he had gone just with Kyrie Irving, and let's say Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant won 2 titles together in Brooklyn. If I'm Kevin Durant, I can say, this discussion, am I as good as LeBron? Am I better than LeBron? Well, I won 2 with Kyrie. LeBron only won 1 with Kyrie. I got the best out of Kyrie, more so than LeBron did. So that would be a feather in his cap. Now, unless Brooklyn wins the title, it's going to be considered a failure, right? And it's kind of interesting, as you said. Now, let's say the Lakers play the Nets in the finals. A finals which you will not watch because the Lakers could go one up on the Celtics in terms of titles.
It's been my nightmare, Brooklyn. And it's going to happen.
It's going to come true. It's probably going to come true. I mean, I'm more confident that Brooklyn gets to the finals because I just don't think the East is deep enough. The Lakers, they still have a few minefields in the West, but I still think they'll be fine, as long as LeBron and Anthony Davis are healthy. But I think a lot of people will root for the Lakers over the Nets. First of all, the Lakers have a huge brand. It's still the biggest brand in the NBA. So people are going to root for them.
Yeah, they're the most popular team in the league.
And of all those great players, the guy who turns people off the least of the 5 great players we're talking about is Anthony Davis, right?
Sure.
Like he's not interesting. He's kind of dull, but he's not someone that anybody has any strong feelings about. Like Kyrie is hated in Boston. He's kind of a loopy, so no one's going to like him. James Harden ate his way out of Houston. Durant keeps showing up on super teams, and LeBron's the most polarizing guy in the league. Whereas Anthony Davis is like, yeah, he's really talented, seems like a nice guy. He's a Green Bay Packers fan. How bad a guy could he be, right? So he would be the one guy people actually be rooting for in the finals. Like, I kind of like Anthony Davis. The other guys I'm not crazy about. That's what people will say, and that's kind of hilarious because, for the most part, people will root against LeBron or the Lakers unless they're Laker fans.
Sure.
And in that case, the agnostic fans will probably root for the Lakers. Now, the Celtic fans are going to just hope the thing get canceled because they can't win in either situation.
Yeah, it's brutal. No, it's a Celtics fan. I've seen it coming since like week 2 of the season, and it's awful. It's like a Bataan death march to the finals for me. But that's the state of the Celtics. It's crap. Everything's crap
right.
in the Celtics land right now. So yeah, I am not looking forward to the teams. I do think it will be an excellent competition between the 2 of them, but it is 2 super teams. I mean, you can't make any doubt about that, but we'll see how that goes. A team, Sap, moving on from the super teams, a team that is by far and away, in my mind, the worst team in the league is the Houston Rockets, who recently had a 20-game losing streak and traded away the centerpiece of the James Harden trade, Victor Oladipo, for 2 guys they're just going to get rid of, Kelly Olynyk and Avery Bradley, and then a pick swap that they won't end up using. So for nothing, their GM, Raphael Stone, this is his first year on the job, and what a year it's been. He says, no regrets about the hashtag no regrets about the James Harden trade. He said that, quote, I would for sure 100% do that deal again. You guys don't have the advantages of knowing everything I know, speaking to the media, but literally no part of me regrets doing that deal. I have not second guessed it for a moment. Strong words from a guy whose team is going to be the worst team in the NBA for at least the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, maybe he gets lucky and gets the first pick in the draft and ends up with Cade Cunningham. So that would be a building block going forward. Look, you had James Harden, who's
Hey, by the way, if that pick falls out of the top 4, it's not theirs anymore. It goes to the Thunder.
Exactly. Yeah, which Sam Presti's got his team in good shape going forward with, 34 draft picks over the next 7 years, which hopefully he doesn't use all of them because that would give me a migraine headache. But he can move pieces for other players. He's got some nice players on his roster. At least he's got a game plan, Sam Presti, right? He knows what he's doing. Raphael Stone,
they're in good shape.
No regrets. Yeah. They're in great shape, Oklahoma City. I think they're, in really good shape because they're sinking to the bottom. They're remaining somewhat competitive, but they've got so many draft picks and cap space that they're going to be fine. When you traded James Harden, who's one of the 6, 7, 8 best players in the world, wherever you want to rank him, I mean, he's an asset, and he's still playing at a very high level. If you could have moved him to Brooklyn for Karis LeVert and Jared Allen and some draft picks, I would say that's a good move, right? Because that's what Brooklyn gave up, but they didn't all come to you. Jared Allen ended up in Cleveland. Karis LeVert's now playing in Indiana. Like, if that was the trade, if you're Raphael Stone, go, Jared Allen's a nice piece, Karis LeVert's a nice piece, I got some draft capital, good, we can move on from here. They've taken what they got and turned it into less. It's almost like, is there something wrong with the city of Houston? Because the Texans did this. They traded 2 first-round picks for Laramie Tunsil, an offensive tackle, and now the Dolphins, who got those 2 picks, have turned it into more first-round picks. So in the end, Laramie Tunsil somehow is going to net 4 first-round picks to the Dolphins.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And 49ers and Eagles or whoever the hell the teams are. And Houston's left with, a good offensive tackle. Whoopee! What are you going to do with that? You don't have a quarterback. He may be in jail in about 6 months. But so is something going on in Houston, something in the drinking water? Because they actually had a pretty good run, right? The Texans looked like they were heading the right direction with Deshaun Watson and some talented players. The Astros won a World Series. Sure, they probably cheated to win it, but who doesn't cheat these days? And then you had the Rockets, were this close to beating the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals a few years ago.
No, they were on top of the world.
Top of the world. Now you've got the Astros are dismantling the team because they can't afford players like George Springer, who's now with Toronto in baseball. The Texans are probably the worst team in football with a quarterback that's in some legal shit, to say the least. And now your basketball team went from being relevant to irrelevant. You didn't get enough back in return. Like, I know the NBA trades are complicated and you're like the only person that understands them, that you can't just make, team for team swap because the contracts have to fit. So you have to bring in a third or a fourth team, and somehow Danny Ainge gets a 2nd round pick for wink, wink, nod, nod, how these deals all work out. In some sense, actually, didn't Danny Ainge have a part in LeBron going to Miami? Remember, there was like a 2nd round pick that had to be tossed.
I'm trying to remember. I think he did.
It was something crazy.
They also had a part in Rasheed Wallace going to the Pistons.
Right. Yeah. So it's just like it's kind of crazy to keep all track of this. But if you could have just got Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, draft picks, then the Rockets could say, okay, we've got these 2, nice young players. We can build from there. They don't even have them.
Yeah. This is what ultimately that they got. The Nets first rounders in 2022, 2024, 2026, and the Bucks 2023 first rounder, plus the right to swap in this year, 23, 25, or 27 with the Nets. So, I mean, that's really future oriented, and just hoping that the Nets implode and that those guys go their separate ways. The thing that you've seen with picks, and you've seen this specifically if you're a Celtics fan, is that you might think the pick will end up good. There's just no way to prognosticate that far into the future. It's impossible. It worked out with the Nets trade the Celtics made with Garnett and Pierce, and it worked out terribly with the Kings and the Memphis trades, and those picks didn't amount to anything. So it's impossible to know. And I just, at the time, I didn't think that Brooklyn was the right trade partner, because it sent a bad message, for one, that Harden got to pick his team with 2 years. Again, he had 2 years left on his contract. He wasn't a guy who's going to be a free agent and leave them this offseason. He should have had a lot less leverage than he did. And they kind of caved, thinking, let's just get rid of this situation. And they made the wrong move. And now to double down and say you do it, those picks might end up being valuable. I don't know. But to expect fans to have to stick around and care up until 2027, where you might have a good pick. I mean, that's 5 years from now. It's a long time to just suck and have no real hope on the horizon. And they're going to get some good picks of their own. Maybe not this year because they might lose it. But they're going to be bad for a long time. And they don't have what Oklahoma City's done is they have supplemental pieces that they can develop along the way. Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a good player. Dort is a good player. They have guys that they can bring along while they accumulate these draft picks and young players. So by the time that those players are ready to go, they already have a seasoned pro in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and they're ready to actually start winning, as opposed to, okay, you get the guy in 2027. It's going to take 3, 4, 5 years for him to get really going. And so you're talking about being bad for 10 years potentially. That's just such too long of a time to be a basement dweller, especially in a huge market like Houston, for a team that is expected to be competitive historically.
Raphael Stone probably won't make those draft picks, right? Because if this
I
continues, he'll be gone. Tillman Fertitta, what's his name?
Tillman Fertitta.
Tillman Fertitta. He's a Paisan. Tillman Fertitta. He doesn't seem like a very patient guy. So I think in 3 years, when the Rockets continue to suck, that Raphael Stone will no longer be the general manager and Silas will no longer be the coach, because he does seem to be a bit of a not a patient man, Tillman Fertitta. Now, when the Celtics moved on from Garnett and Pierce, those guys were past their prime.
Yeah.
Right? James Harden's
absolutely
in his prime. Like James Harden's going to be an impact player for what, 3, 4, 5 more years, unless he finds all the strip clubs in New York. And maybe they're still closed because of the pandemic. Once they reopen, maybe that shortens his career because he's going to balloon up to what he was in Houston. But he's still got a lot of ball left in him. Garnett and Pierce were way past their prime. You knew that once those guys left, the Nets were going to just sink. And those draft picks turned out to be Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. The Nets are going to be relevant for the next, at minimum, 3, 4 years. So now we're looking to 2027 when maybe the Nets are no longer good and you get a high draft pick. But what's the guarantee that's even going to be a top 3 pick?
Right, you don't know.
And what do you end up with?
You just saw that with the Kings and the Grizzlies. Yeah. Teams can have surprising seasons where they're not as bad as you think, and it's still a lottery, and you're not guaranteed anything. And in addition to that, with the talking about the Oladipo move, if you're going to get a player back as an asset, which I do think you should try to do, you can then try to get a player that you can flip for something else for more assets. They just basically tossed him as cap fodder. So they got nothing in return for him that they're going to use. The pick swap, it says it's a pick swap in 2022, but why would you swap out? You're going to be worse than the Heat, so they're not going to use it. So it's nothing. So they basically cap dumped a player that was supposed to be the centerpiece of this trade. And I'm not saying that they should have, that Oladipo wasn't a good player to get at the time, and that obviously it looks like they should have gotten LeVert or Jared Allen or both instead. But okay, you make the decision to take Oladipo, but you got to get more for him, or get a player that you can, if you're going to trade the player, get more for than just a cap dump. It's just not good management. It's no way to run a team. And like you're saying, he's not going to end up, so he can say, I feel great about this trade, I would do it all over again, but he's not going to see the benefits of any of the trades. So
not at all.
I don't know why he's saying that.
I have to wonder too, because Tillman Fertitta, and I'll bring him up again, I think he took a massive hit during the pandemic because he's in the entertainment business. He took a huge hit. He owns hotels, restaurants.
They're going public. The Rockets are going public because he needs the money.
He needs the money. So that leads you to believe that now he's trying to dump salary, and that this team is in a sell mode, not in a buy mode. So that kind of brings its way into it as well. This is not like Steve Ballmer owning the Clippers. It's like a joke for him. He's worth $75 billion. He paid $2 billion for it. He could go sign every player in the NBA if there was no cap and win a championship, although the Clippers would still manage to screw that up. I
do believe he is worth more than all the owners combined. They've done the math.
I would believe that.
Steve Ballmer is worth more than them.
$75 billion, Jed. He's one of the 10 richest men in the country. I mean, that's a pretty good spot to be in. Tillman Fertitta lost a lot of money during the pandemic. He took an absolute bath. So I think that weighs in on how they're running the Rockets as well. But sometimes when you're pushed against the wall, you still got to react better than just start giving pieces away and making kind of crazy trades that are going to leave your future in peril. And look, by all of these moves, the value of the Houston Rockets has gone down. If he wants to try to flip the team, which, as you said, is going public now, the value has gone down. So this is not a time to be a Houston Rockets fan at all.
No, it's a really crappy time. They're gonna be bad. Like I said, I could see them being terrible for 10 years.
Yep.
That's not an exaggeration, because you're looking down the line at it takes, if you're gonna get great draft picks by tanking, which is they're obviously doing, it still takes those players time. Look, Zion Williamson was the can't miss number 1 picks, and he's playing outstanding. I saw him decimate the Celtics last night. They're not going to make the playoffs this year. They didn't make the playoffs last year. It takes these guys a couple years to impact winning. LeBron didn't even make the playoffs in his first year.
Or second year. It was his third year.
Durant, it took him a couple of years. It takes some time. So you can get good players a couple of years in a row. Look at the freaking Timberwolves. They are in the top of the draft every year. And it's not like they've botched the picks outside of Anthony Bennett, which they botched badly. That was
Cleveland that botched him, actually.
You're right. It was Cleveland. Yeah. They traded for Anthony
Andrew
Bennett.
Wiggins wasn't a botched pick because he was a consensus number 1 pick in 2014. And he's had a nice career. I mean, if you had to do that draft over again, you take Embiid first. But
no one was. Everybody's saying take Wiggins 1.
Wiggins was the can't miss guy.
It wasn't really a botched pick.
No, not at all. I mean,
it's like Odin wasn't a botched pick either, because he was the consensus number 1.
Yeah, and look, I love Jalen Suggs, and I could see Jalen Suggs going to Minnesota. Is the first, second, or third pick in the draft. Now they'd have their point guard, they got their center, they've got their wing and Anthony Edwards, and Suggs is from Minnesota. He's got all sorts of leadership ability, but that's no guarantee that the Timberwolves are going to be a factor. As you said about New Orleans, they got some pretty good pieces around Zion, but it takes time to develop winning.
It's like I'm saying, it could be a 10-year rebuild because they tore it down to the floorboards there, Sap. They have nothing.
And there's still termites inside of the dwelling, so that's not
bad.
Good.
It's bad, and it's going to stay bad.
And the contractor and the homeowner, they're running out of money.
Yeah,
in the case of Tillman Fertitta, it's in a bad neighborhood. Not a good place to be if you're a Houston Rockets fan or Houston Texans fans.
No,
get the hell out of Houston.
I would say to Raphael Stone, you're going to regret it when you're out of a job in a year.
Update that resume.
Listen, Sam Hinkie, he had the whole plan, and that was his plan to tank, and they couldn't even be patient enough with him. And that was he was upfront about it. They're not even being upfront about it.
No.
So he's not long for the job, but that's what it is in Houston. So that's going to do it for us for the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. We went from the Lakers and the Nets, the cream of the NBA crop, to the absolute dregs of the NBA crop and the Rockets. What a great full circle show, Sap, for us to be able to do that. I think we're going to be talking about the Lakers and Nets still the next 2-3 seasons, and we will not be talking about the Rockets outside of the embarrassment that they are. So check out our podcast on fullpresscoverage.com, up on YouTube. You can see it on SoundCloud or Spotify, all sorts of places. And that will do it. Thanks for listening, everybody. Remember to comment and like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and hit us up on Twitter at JohnSap25, at JetStryer. Let us know what you think. Anything you want us to talk about NBA related, we are glad to take your suggestions. All right. See you, everybody. All right, Sap, you need to take a quick break?
Yeah, just gonna grab another cup of coffee. I make the pot perfectly for the two.
Fine. Welcome into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Hope everybody is enjoying their week so far. Player who is enjoying his week and his season, quick transition into the intro, is Moses Brown. Yes, that's right. I'm starting off the show talking about Moses Brown. Do you know who he is? Are you watching my face on YouTube? Do I look confused? I know who he is because I saw him go for 20-20 against the Celtics the other day. Most people don't know who this guy is because he is an undrafted free agent out of UCLA. He plays on the Oklahoma City Thunder. And this isn't even his rookie season. He was on the Trailblazers last year. Who the hell is this guy who's suddenly putting up 20-point rebounding games? And why isn't he on the Boston Celtics, Sap?
Well, they've got their own version of Moses Brown. That would be Robert Williams III, although he was a draft pick. Moses Brown somehow wasn't even drafted. if not more. I mean, Moses Brown is 7'2", about 245, right? Went to UCLA. You would think that a 7'2" guy who can walk and chew gum at the same time would be drafted somewhere
Right.
in
That's
the
what I
NBA
don't
draft.
get. They draft dudes who can barely stand at 7 feet. This guy's 7'2" and athletic.
He doesn't fit into today's NBA game because he's not a stretch four or whatever. He doesn't take 3-pointers, but who cares? He can rebound. He can block some shots. The interesting thing is Sam Presti at Oklahoma City is now giving him a multi-year contract. He was on a 10-day contract. He was a G League guy going back and forth. And he's put together a 5-game stretch, which is damn impressive. In the last 5 games, averaging 13 points, 15 rebounds, 1.5 blocks, playing 31 minutes per game, shooting 61% from the field. And what caught my eye is, again, the first exposure I had to him was the other night when he was putting up a 20-20 game against the Celtics, is that he's from New York City, went to high school at Archbishop Malloy, and then went to UCLA. Now, there's an all-time great that did the same thing. Karim Abdul-Jabbar from New York City, Archbishop Malloy, and UCLA. That's where the comparison kind of ends, because in my opinion, Kareem's the 4th greatest player in the history of the whole sport. But this young guy is
Kareem
intriguing.
also played for the Oklahoma City Thunder, if I'm recalling correctly.
They play for the Milwaukee Bucks. When people say
basically the same thing.
The same thing, yeah, because the last time the Bucks were in the finals was 1974, and Kareem was their starting center. Heck, Oscar Robertson was still playing in 1974. That's the last time the Bucks went to the finals, and they've been pretty good many times. You know, growing up, Marcus Johnson and Sidney Moncrief were my guys. They were always in contention, could never break through. Now they got Giannis, they can't break through. But the interesting thing about this young guy, Moses Brown, is he was not drafted. And normally NBA, undrafted free agents don't really make any sort of impact. And I'm not saying this young guy is going to be a future all-star and is going to lead the Oklahoma City Thunder to a championship, but that's a pretty impressive 5-game stretch. He also has apparently good hands. You could tell from that game. They were doing some pick and rolls with him.
No, he's not a stiff.
He's not a stiff. He seems pretty fluid. So maybe they found something here. He's just a late bloomer. And Sam Presti, who's real good at his job, may have found a hidden gem.
Yeah, I just, like you said, Sep, I don't understand how he didn't get drafted, because usually if you're over 7 feet and you played at a competitive school like UCLA, you typically get drafted. I remember, and maybe, like you said, maybe it's because the league's gone such a different direction, but I'm remembering, back 15 years ago or so, maybe even 20, the Blazers drafted this guy, Ha-Sung Jin, out of South Korea, who was 7'3", purely because he was 7'3". He couldn't play basketball at all. I think I have his rookie jersey card. It's not worth much. But like, this would happen all the time. Players would be drafted from all over Europe, countries you've never heard of, all over Asia, anywhere. If you were over 7 foot tall, they'd give you an NBA contract and you'd be picked in the draft. Now you're finding athletic 7'2" guys who are undrafted. And I think really what it does, Sap, and we're going to explore the sort of history of undrafted free agents in a second. It speaks to how much talent is out there, because you can uncover these good players now, because not every good player gets drafted anymore. And you're going to see the trend when we're going to talk about these undrafted players, that in the past 5 to 10 years, suddenly they're starting to actually make a big impact. And it's not quite the NFL where every year you're finding gems. And like Bill Belichick is the best at it. I mean, he's incredible at finding these undrafted guys. Not so great at drafting, really good at undrafting.
He's better in the undrafted free agency than he is in the second round often.
He is, yes. And so it's really, I think the most interesting thing about it, and a player like Moses Brown, is this is where things are headed, where there's going to be good players who go under the radar and don't get drafted, and every team's going to have a crack at them, or the NBA is going to expand it to 3 rounds because there's going to be enough players to warrant that. So Moses Brown is just the latest and an example of what I think is where this is all heading, which is more talent, more ability to find guys that are not the typical, okay, let's get a top 10 pick. That's how we're going to get talent.
Yeah, I mean, the Celtics have Taco Fall. Now, I don't think Taco Fall is going to develop into anything. I think Moses Brown has already put up better numbers in these 5 games than Taco Fall has put up in his entire career. But there's another guy who's 7'5" that wasn't drafted. One of the best players in college basketball this year, Luka Garza, who played 4 years at Iowa, probably won't get drafted, or if he is
Yeah,
drafted,
he might not. And he can shoot threes too, but he's slow.
He's so slow, so unathletic. But there'll be someone, if he can get into the right system, that maybe you have yourself a good backup.
The kid the
center.
Celtics just got sapped, Luke Cornett, who's been affectionately dubbed the Green Cornett by Celtics fans before he was the Murder Cornett. He is 7'2" and shoots threes out of Vanderbilt, and he's a dead-eye three-point shooter. He wasn't drafted either. It's just that the NBA has gone such a different direction where you can't just be a 7-footer who plays down low. You have to be a 7-footer who plays down low and shoots threes and is quick and can guard multiple positions. Whereas the NBA used to be from the onset until about when Seth Curry came into the league, if you were a 7-footer, the NBA was a great career for you. The NBA was willing to welcome you with open arms. Now, not so good to be a 7-footer. Because they're asking a whole lot of you.
Early in Michael Jordan's career, they drafted Brad Sellers out of Ohio State. He was 6'11", a finesse player who would take, at the time, were considered long shots for a 6'11" guy, 17, 18-footers. And everybody's like, why isn't this guy down low? Brad Sellers may have just been way ahead of his time because that's now the model, right? 6'11" guys who can go out and shoot 25 feet out. I mean, Kevin Durant's nearly 7 feet tall, and he's comfortable taking 35-footers. Now, obviously, he's an outlier among outliers because I believe he's the most versatile scorer in the history of the sport. But, yeah, I mean, I'm sure they would have found room.
What, 7'3", 7'2"?
I'm sure they would have found room for Shaquille O'Neal, who was the classic back-to-the-basket power player, right, at 7'1", 350.
But they would have asked him to do different stuff than he was doing in his prime now. They would ask him to do different stuff.
Yeah, he'd have to change around a little bit. Could he carry as much weight as he did back then? Would he have to slim down? I mean, Shaq, I always hold this against Shaq that he could have been even better than he was. Great
He'd
player.
Struggle more defensively now. The offense wouldn't be an issue because he would just still dominate. And he could score quickly because he could just dunk over people or muscle them. Yeah. But he'd have to be pulled out to the three-point line, which he never really was in his whole NBA career.
No. I mean, I think Kareem would have adapted better. Kareem was more nimble than Shaq. Kareem also was a career 78, 79% free throw shooter. So I think Kareem would have eventually, if he was playing now, would have figured out that, I can take threes and hit them, corner threes, whatever the case may be. He would have adapted to that. Shaq, again, when you see someone really struggle at the free throw line, you can't jump to the conclusion that they're also now going to, improve the free throw shooting and become good three-point shooters. That's what's the interesting thing about Aaron Gordon. This year is like a 60% free throw shooter and a 40% three-point shooter. It's like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and we went over this the other day when we were talking about Brandon Ingram. Earlier in his career, he was a really good shooter, but he was like a 60% free throw shooter. It doesn't make sense. No sense at all.
Yeah,
that's just concentration.
It's concentration. It could be conditioning, whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think of all those great old centers, I think Kareem would have figured it out. I think Olajuwon would have figured it out. Olajuwon would have been a guy. Olajuwon would have been a great three-point shooter. He just would have figured it out. He's, such a great athlete, and he was a soccer goalie, so he had a great foot-eye coordination. But this young man, I was just intrigued by him. But as you were talking about, Jet, just in the history of the league, there haven't been a lot of impact undrafted free agents. And again, there was a time when the draft was 7 rounds. I remember because I used to cover them in the 80s. It would just be like, I thought I was going to get drafted one year because there just, were a lot of players being drafted. Now it's 2 rounds, so you get 60 players drafted, so everybody else goes into a pool of undrafted free agents. But not many in the history of the sport have been undrafted free agents who went on to be Hall of Famers or impact titles. So
no, but I'm telling you now,
not that Moses Brown is, but suddenly you're going to start.
Suddenly you're starting to see it where every year a couple of guys are. So I do think it's going to expand eventually. I'm not saying in the next 5 years, but more and more talent's coming to basketball because less and less talent's going to go to football. That's just how it's going to be in this country because people aren't going to play with the concussions. It's just how parents aren't going to let their kids play. So you're going to see more, and it's growing internationally. So they're eventually going to be forced to expand it. When it's going to happen is when somebody's undrafted and becomes like a phenom, a guy who ends up in the Hall of Fame, and they're going to say
Tom Brady, 6th round pick,
we can't have this
overall.
Sort of stuff happen. Yeah. So it does have us. I think it's less about Moses Brown this conversation as opposed to what the NBA is becoming, which is such a talent-laden league with guys who are coming out of anywhere to potentially make an impact. And we were looking sort of at who are the best undrafted free agents of all time, and the list is sort of scant. And then you go into the last 5 years, and suddenly there becomes a lot of impact players. I'm not saying guys who are. There's really one guy who stands out to me, Sap, and I'm sure in your research you found this too, stands out as the best undrafted free agent ever. To me, at least there was.
Yeah, it's Connie Hawkins.
I didn't.
Well, I'm going way back.
Yeah, I didn't count Connie Hawkins.
Okay, your dad probably would appreciate that as well. He was an undrafted free agent on a technicality. It was a little bit different than he wasn't good enough.
He was also the best high school basketball player on the planet.
And he went to Iowa. He was great at Iowa. Then he got involved wrongfully in some sort of gambling scandal that he had nothing to do with, but he got banned from the NCAA. The NBA wanted nothing to do with him. The ABA wasn't even formed yet. So he played with the Harlem Globetrotters for 4 years. The ABA brought him in, and finally he'd filed a lawsuit against the NBA. And at that point, the NBA says, okay, now you can come into the league. And he was like first team All-NBA his first year with Phoenix at like 27 or 28 years old. So he's the greatest undrafted free agent in the history. But again, that's more on a technicality. If he had gone to school for 4 years at Iowa, he most likely would have been the first pick in the draft. But situation, circumstances out of his control changed all that. Are you thinking Ben Wallace?
Yeah, Ben Wallace
is the guy. Yeah, that would be the guy of the true undrafted free agents.
He went to what, like Virginia
Union?
Yeah, he went to like it was like a military school.
Yeah, I think it was Virginia Union, or was that Charles Oakley School? I think maybe they both went to the same school.
5-time All-NBA, 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, which ties him for the most Defensive Player of the Year awards of all time. He's a borderline Hall of Famer. Not sure
I think he belongs. I think he belongs.
But I would say if you win that award 4 times, you kind of are denigrating the award if you don't put somebody in who wins it 4 times, right?
Wasn't he essentially the next Dennis Rodman? Like Dennis Rodman didn't score a lot, rebounded, defend, won. I mean, Rodman did win 5 championships, but if you play with Michael Jordan, you were going to win multiple championships.
He was a poor man's Dennis Rodman, which
and in some
not
ways
an insult.
Led the league in rebounding multiple times and was a key figure on a championship team. I wrote a column last year about 5 players I'd like to see in the Hall of Fame, and Ben Wallace is one of them. I know he's a semifinalist or a finalist this time around. Hopefully he gets in. I think he deserves to be in. And you've got a team there in Detroit that did win a championship, but also a team that went to the Eastern Conference Finals like 4 out of 5 years. So they were really good for a 5-year period, and they don't have anybody other than, of course, Larry Brown only coached there for a few years in the Hall of Fame. I don't Chauncey Billups is a borderline guy.
Is there any championship team that has not put in a Hall of Fame player?
That's a great question. I would say that Detroit.
Obviously the modern ones has to play itself out, but Detroit should one of those guys should get in.
Someone should be in, and in that column I said Ben Wallace and Chauncey Billups. Chauncey Billups' career numbers are so similar to Joe Dumars, who's won 2 championships with the Pistons, but Dumars and Chauncey Billups' career were nearly identical. I think Ben Wallace belongs in there. I don't think Rasheed Wallace belongs in there, or Tayshaun Prince, or
no.
Rip
You
Hamilton.
can make a case. You can make a case for Hamilton, Billups, Wallace, or Wallace. You can make a case for any of those. But
in that order, I'd go Ben Wallace
and then Chauncey Billups. Make the strongest case.
The strongest case. Yeah, I wouldn't put the other 2 in. They weren't.
But here's Ben Wallace's career highlights, Seth, before we move on to the rest of the list. He won 2 NBA Finals appearances. One of them he won in what was one of the biggest upsets in the history of the NBA Finals. 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, 02, 03, 05, 06. 4-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA second team, 2-time All-NBA third team, 5-time All-NBA first team, 1-time All-NBA defensive second team, 2-time rebound leader, 1-time blocks leader, has his jersey number retired in
That's a Hall of Famer.
Detroit.
Especially the Basketball Hall of Fame tends to let more people in that probably belong in there. He belongs in the Hall of Fame. That's just, my opinion.
Yeah, and the team was always really good. They made 5 or 6 straight conference finals, the Pistons.
You didn't listen to me, Jet. I said that
you said?
a minute and a half ago. I said I think 4 out of 5 years. When the host doesn't listen, See, no one listens to me. I feel like the dad in my big fat Greek wedding.
I just assumed you were talking about LeBron or Aaron Rodgers.
Not
Sorry.
always, not always, no. Jed. I'm trying to branch out into these other guys.
He's also in the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame. Take that for what it's worth. I don't know who they put in. Yes, Virginia Union, by the way, we were correct, Sep. That is where he went.
I pulled that one out of my ass, didn't I?
The Virginia Union Panthers.
There you go.
They are located in Richmond, Virginia. Have you ever been?
Hopefully. No, I've never been to Richmond. Wasn't he in camp with the Celtics at one point?
He was. Yes, he was. Yes. That was I believe that was Rick Pitino who passed on him.
No slander
Jim
on
O'Brien.
Rick Pitino. Yes.
And maybe it was Jim O'Brien. He actually started with the Wizards, then ended up on the Magic, and then the Pistons found him, and it worked like gangbusters for the Pistons. So it took him a while to get going.
What an amazing story, though. Undrafted, then they had to go through all that and talk about a self-made man. He belongs in the Hall of Fame. That's my new campaign, to get Ben Wallace into the Basketball Hall of Fame. That's my thing. It took me 15 years to get Jerry Kramer into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the great Packer guard. I wanted to get Ron Santo into the Baseball Hall of Fame. That finally happened a year after he passed away. So now it's Ben Wallace. Obviously, my lead cause is getting Barry Bonds into the Baseball Hall of Fame. I'm going up there the first week of June. I'm going to storm the Hall of Fame, kind of like, the crazy people did at the Capitol on January 6th, wearing my Bonds jersey because he belongs in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, I shouldn't have said that because now they're going to be watching out for me.
Stop the steal. That's what you're going to say.
Stop the steal. Yes.
Yeah. And then you'll be on the phone with Fox News saying, I was just hugging all the police officers and security guards. I love them. They're very good people on both sides.
Tremendous people.
I'm curious who else you had on your list, Sep.
Those were the first two that came to mind. Were Connie Hawkins and
like you said, Connie Hawkins
Wallace.
Technicality, Ben Wallace for sure. Was there anybody else that stood out to you though?
There were a few other players, but I think you have
not
the list
saying Hall of Famers.
No, but you have the list in front of you.
Yeah,
guys that were
I do.
Really good. Why don't you run through them and I can kind of react to that.
The best one currently playing in the NBA right now is Fred VanVleet, who is who is an excellent player, borderline all-star this year, may end up making an all-star game or two by the time his career is over. Just signed a nice contract with the Raptors this past offseason. He was undrafted after being everybody knew who he was too, because he was a college star at Wichita State, a team that made noise in the tournament, but he was undrafted because he was undersized and has come into the NBA and been pretty much good from the get-go and has a title with the Raptors already.
So, that's a great one as well. Probably the best player in the league right now that was undrafted. He was on that list. There were a few other
Bruce
older
Bowen
players.
Is a
Bruce
guy
Bowen
who
was another
won
guy.
a couple titles with San Antonio as a starter and a major impact player, a really, really great defensive player. He was undrafted. A guy who could play a big role in a contending team this year, Seth Curry, was undrafted, and which is strange because, obviously you would take the flyer on the kid who's brothers with Steph and dad played in the NBA and who went to Duke, but he went undrafted. Raja Bell, similar to Bruce Bowen type of player for the Suns when they were very good, gritty defensive player, probably best known for trying to throw the ball at Kobe's head on the inbounds pass when Kobe didn't flinch. Again, it's filled with guys now, Sap. I'm just going to run on guys who are still in the NBA before I get to the last two who are notable. Robert Covington was undrafted out of HBCU.
Good player.
TJ McConnell undrafted. Royce O'Neal is starting for this Jazz team that is, running roughshod through the regular season. Christian Wood looked like he was going to be a potential all-star before his season got derailed and probably the rest of his career because he's on the Rockets now. Duncan Robinson, you saw pay big dividends for the Heat in the NBA Finals and NBA Conference Finals last year. Celtics fans saw this guy the other day, Lugienz Dort on the Thunder. So like I said, it's happening more and more frequently with these undrafted guys playing an impact role because these are starters on good teams, Sap. O'Neal, McConnell, Duncan Robinson. The Thunder aren't that good right now, but Dort was a starter on the Thunder last year when they made the playoffs.
Christian Wood's having a really good year with Houston. I mean, it almost sounds like an oxymoron. He's
just been hurt. It's not his
He's
fault.
been hurt, but he's a good young player, right? I think he's putting up some serious numbers.
And then two guys, older guys, Sap, John Starks and Avery Johnson, both undrafted.
Yeah, and Avery Johnson, is a champion with the San Antonio Spurs, and John Starks, if he could have hit maybe one shot in Game 7 of the '94 Finals, would have been a champion as well. I think he was 1 for 16 from the floor that night against the Rockets in Game 7.
Yeah, he made Evan Fournier blush.
Yeah, Fournier somehow went 0 for 10 to start his career with the Celtics. And just think of that thing, and I know sometimes I go down a rabbit hole, and I apologize. But go back to the 94
That's why I don't
finals.
listen to you, Seth.
That's why you don't listen. You'll probably come back in 3 minutes and go, what about the 94 finals? No one talks about that. I'd like to forget the 94 finals because it was ugly basketball. The 90s was very ugly to watch. And then you had the Rockets and the Knicks who brought like a football element to it. I'm sure you were, 5 years old at the time? That may have been your first finals you remember. That's why you probably loved it, because it was just watching like football. You had like Charles Oakley and Otis Thorpe like crashing into each other, and John Starks played, with a certain edge to him. He had Olajuwon and Ewing in the middle. But if the Knicks had won that title, I wonder what the legacy of Patrick Ewing and Hakeem Olajuwon would be, because then they'd each have one championship. So maybe
you'd recognize Ewing if he goes into the Garden and you're a security officer.
That's true too. Yeah, how can you not notice that's Patrick Ewing at Madison Square Garden? I mean, that'd be like Kevin McHale or Bird or Parrish walking in to TD Garden and people saying, "Who is this guy?" Actually, that's even worse in New York because it's the same damn building the guy played in.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I wonder. I still think Olajuwon was the slightly better player than Ewing, but it would have been closer if the Knicks had won that championship, because they'd each have one championship, and Ewing did beat Olajuwon in college in the championship game. So that's how much legacy can change in the finals. Because Ewing is among the 5 or 6 greatest players without a championship. Obviously, the great Elgin Baylor, who passed away a week ago, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley. You can make a case that Patrick Ewing is the best center to never win a championship in NBA history.
Yeah, you certainly could. And like you said, not just the legacy of him, but of his teammates too. John Starks would probably be if you win a title, then people suddenly forget about that really terrible game. So the undrafted, it's not super notable yet, but I'm telling you, in the past 5 years, you have all these guys who have undrafted has gone from guys who have been the last guy on the bench to come into camp and just don't make the team to, okay, now they're playing a little bit of a 6-man role, to now they're starters on good teams. It's heading in just pay attention to how it's trending. It's trending to a point where you're going to find somebody or multiple guys who go undrafted and end up being all-stars, because there's just going to be there's just an infusion of talent, and you can't scout everybody. So I'm telling you, watch who your team signs when the draft is over, because you don't know who the next impact player or all-star is going to be or where they're coming from, because we are in this era of unprecedented levels of talent.
The talent is incredible at this point, the best it's ever been in league history. And as you said, Jet, you have college basketball, that's a great talent pool, but you got players going from high school straight to the G League. You've got players from Europe, Asia, which hasn't flooded the market as much as I thought, but there's also South America. The talent
Africa's
pool
starting
is
their
phenomenal.
professional league this year. This is the
starting,
start.
Yes, this is Masai Ujiri and President Obama have worked a lot on that.
It's going to yield results too.
Oh, it's just going to be phenomenal, right? I mean, you can make a case that Joel Embiid and Giannis both, were born in Africa and then moved from there. Giannis went to Greece, and then Embiid, I believe, came to the United States to play high school basketball, but they were from the continent originally. But yeah, once we start to see even growth from Africa, the talent pool is unbelievable, because right now this is the second most popular sport in the world behind only soccer. And you brought up earlier, if I had a great athlete as a kid, I wouldn't want him to play football. I just wouldn't. I mean, the concussion issue really is an issue that sickens me. Also, the careers are short. The contracts aren't guaranteed. Look, and I'm not going to have a kid. I don't have a kid, nor am I going to have one that's going to be that type of athlete. But I'm just, putting myself in that situation. Basketball, the career is long. The injury concerns aren't that big. You can have a 15-year career and make a ton of money. I mean, look, Lamarcus Aldridge, we talked about on the last podcast, who's I guess a borderline Hall of Famer, right? He's made over $200 million.
Yeah,
is he going to make that in football?
Gordon, we talked about this in the offseason. Gordon Hayward made over 200. million
Same thing.
already.
Yeah, both guys.
He's barely played.
He's played one All-Star. He's been in one All-Star game. Yeah, so I mean that's where you go. I mean, to get to that level in the NFL, you better be a franchise quarterback. And even then, the last few years of the contract, they kind of dick you around, and all of a sudden they, move you. I mean, look, just, it sums up the sport, the difference in the two sports. Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback ever, got nickeled and dimed by the New England Patriots the last 3 or 4 years he was here.
Yeah.
I would never see that happening to LeBron James. First of all, LeBron James would just become a free agent when his contract's up and go to the highest bidder. And that's why I supported Brady in going to Tampa. I'm like, go get what you want to get, Tom, because you've given this team endless discounts. And if this is how they're treating you, remember going into, I think it was the 2018 season, we were working on the Herald together. They gave him this insane incentive-laden contract to the greatest quarterback ever. Really? Like,
yeah, it's based off of league averages too,
yeah,
and it really should be. It should be individual.
Yeah.
It should have been an individual thing, but that's neither here nor there.
Should be no incentives.
Totally
like that.
different leagues.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why you're going to say, look at Zion, right? Like Zion in the past, I'm sure, when he was in 10th grade, the football coach where he was at, or in college, Zion would be a first round pick in the NFL. If he said, you know what, I'm really sick of basketball, I'm going to go play in the NFL. Imagine Zion as a tight end.
He never played a game of football in his life. He didn't play in high school or middle school. He got offered football scholarships to LSU and Alabama.
Yeah.
Got offered him.
There's not a lot of 6'7",
He's never played.
200. No, and I would draft him. There's not a lot of 6'7", 290-pound guys walking around that have that type of athletic ability. Look at Antonio Gates was more of a basketball player at Wichita State. Came out, had a Hall of Fame type career with the Chargers. Tony Gonzalez, who I think is the greatest tight end ever.
Antonio Gates, a Hall of Famer for sure.
To me, Gronk may be the best tight end ever, but Tony Gonzalez is the most accomplished. I mean, the guy, his numbers dwarf everybody. He was a great player at Cal as a basketball player. So the NFL's always looked at basketball players. Charlie Ward won a Heisman Trophy in football and then went to basketball. So his was a little bit different. But yeah, the sport's kind of connected at some point. But I would prefer to be a basketball player. The careers are longer, the money's guaranteed, and you're not going to retire and worry about how long you're going to live because of the concussion issue.
Yeah, and speak about all the orthopedic issues too. That it's brutal.
Oh man, it's
sad. I'm not saying that basketball is not hard. You're going to deal with some knee stuff, but you're not talking about dealing with never being able to like walk again or go to the bathroom on your own.
Yep,
so
exactly.
Again, we got a little bit off track here, but I'm just saying.
My fault.
No, it's okay. Do you remember the 94 finals? That's what I wanted to bring up, Seth.
Yes, you would. I'm going to get you the DVD of the 94 finals. It's like watching paint dry, but you will enjoy it because it was like tackling and punching and low scoring games. It was quite interesting.
So I'm curious to see who's going to be undrafted and be really good after this year's draft, because there will be at least 4 or 5 players from every draft going forward now that will end up making an impact in the NBA. And you couldn't say that 20 years ago. You couldn't even say that.
No, not at all. Even 10 years ago, then you started to see that because now the talent pool is just so good.
Right. Like, who wouldn't want a Fred VanVleet on their team? Any team would love to have Fred VanVleet. And he's not even overpaid. He signed a big contract. He earned it.
He's a hell of a player. Big reason Toronto won the championship 2 years ago. You can make a case he was the 4th best player on that team behind Kawhi, Lowry, and Siakam. I mean, I can make that case. Serge Ibaka had a nice final series as well, but VanVleet was huge in those playoffs.
Yeah. So let's end the show today, Sap, with checking in on our MVP ladder. Let's do our top 5 because it has been changing a lot with injuries. Basically, it's been the reason it's been changing so much. What do you got? What do you got right now?
I got at number 5, Giannis, the 2-time reigning MVP. He's putting up numbers like he normally puts up. He's
creeping back in it.
He sure is. 28, 11, and 6. The team's 29 and 17. I think there's some sort of MVP fatigue. Chamberlain, Russell, and Larry Bird are the only 3 players in the history of the sport that have won 3 consecutive league MVPs. I don't think Giannis is going to do this unless the 4 guys that I have above him all have their numbers go down or don't play a lot down the stretch. Number 4, I've got LeBron James. Here's an interesting number. With LeBron on the court, the Lakers are plus 281 points this year. With him off the court, they're minus 61. That's the definition of MVP.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. The best player in the world not playing will impact the team. James Harden, I have at number 3. The numbers he's putting up are just incredible. He's averaging 26 points per game and leading the league in assists with nearly 12 assists per game. So he's still putting up a lot of points while leading the league in assists. That's an incredible combination. By the way, throws in about 8.5 rebounds a game as well. The team's 32-15. He's been the one constant since he got there. I still think he's going to get punished and should be punished because the first month of the season, he just mailed it in with Houston, forced his way out of there. It's the 2020-2021 MVP, not just the 2021 MVP. So I got Harden number 3. Number 2, I have Dame Lillard, who I had number 1 last time we did this exercise, averaging 30 points, nearly 8 assists. His team is 28-18. The same record as the guy I have at number 1, and that's Nikola Jokic for the Denver Nuggets. So if you look at team success, Portland and Denver have the same record. And I know Dame did a lot of this without CJ McCollum, but Jokic's numbers are just staggering. 27, 11, nearly 9 assists. And the thing that I think puts Jokic and Dame ahead of a lot of the other guys is they've both been durable. Harden, again, we're going to punish him because of the way he acted in Houston. LeBron's been out now for a week and a half. Giannis, there's a certain amount of fatigue. Embiid's not even in my top 5. He was probably at the forefront of this when he got hurt. So I think that those guys, if you miss 10, 12, 15 games this year, you're probably out of contention for the MVP. So I've got Jokic 1, Dame 2, Harden 3, LeBron 4, Giannis 5. In 10 days, 2 weeks, when we do it again, I'm sure it's going to be totally different because it's been a very fluid exercise.
I'm going to do mine, and then I'm going to ask you a question because I think it's an important question. So I'll do mine quickly then. I have LeBron at 5. I have Embiid at 4. They're both going to end up not winning it because they're going to miss too many games. Yep. I have Giannis at 3. He's completely creeped back into it because the Bucks are playing really, really good right now, though they somehow managed to. Oh no, they didn't lose to the Celtics. The Celtics pissed that one away.
Well, they split 2 games though, and the Celtics destroyed them in the back-to-back. So in the second game. Yeah,
the second game of the back. Giannis didn't play well in that game, but the Bucks are playing better. Jokic, I have at 2. I have Lillard at 1. So just flip-flop them.
Yeah.
Jokic has had a healthier team for longer.
True.
It's basically, so I'm penalizing him, which isn't really fair to do. But Lillard, I've just been really, really impressed with how he's carried the team. My question for you, Sap, is this is our personal MVP rankings. I left James Harden out because screw James Harden. He tanked the team on purpose. The numbers would indicate to me he should be at the very top of the list in the team record, but I'm just not giving it to him. You can't intentionally make a team worse and win MVP in the same year. I'm not okay with doing that. So the question for you I have, Sap, before we get out of here is, that's your personal rankings. If the season ended today, who do you think would win the award? Not who should win the award. Who do you think because it's voted on by the media. Right. Who would win the award?
Jokic. Because that's by all indications on Basketball Reference, on ESPN, on all of the sites that track this, the MVP tracker. He seems to be comfortably ahead of Dame Lillard right now. And then you go to Harden, Giannis, LeBron, Embiid, and also Kawhi Leonard's kind of creeped into this because Kawhi actually is playing more than I thought he would play. He's not load managing as much as he did last year. If Kawhi plays 90% of the games, he's an MVP candidate because he's so great at both ends of the floor. I think right now Jokic is probably the lead guy. I think the league, in a sense, would love to see Dame win an award like this. He's been in Portland his entire career, and Jokic has been with Denver his entire career. But Dame is someone that I think that the league, the media really likes. He's got kind of a Steph Curry to him, that he's happy where he is. He's a great leader. He's a clutch player. And it's always kind of fun to give it to a 6'1" guy over a 7-footer, right? I mean, that's always kind of a fun story. So I think it's going to come down to those two guys. The reason I give it to Jokic is he's only averaging 3 points per game fewer than Dame, but he's averaging 7 more rebounds per game and actually more assists. So in terms of those
he has the
numbers,
highest player efficiency rating in the league right now. It's by a mile, Sap. He's at 33.99999. Right. The next closest is Giannis at 30.4.
Crazy, isn't it? I mean,
so he's way ahead of everybody else, and Dame Lillard's at 7 overall with 28 is his player efficiency rating.
Now,
so it's not close. He's running away with that.
Could this be determined on which team finishes ahead of the other? Yeah. Like who has the better record, Portland or Denver?
Yeah, like you said, they're tied right now.
They're tied for 5th too, so it's not like they're tied for 1st. But a couple of years ago,
No, they're not
Westbrook
going
won
to
the
get there.
MVP. No, neither one of them is going to get to the top or even second. Depends on what the Lakers do with LeBron and Anthony Davis out. They could slip below those teams. But a few years ago, Westbrook won the MVP, and I believe Oklahoma City was the 6th seed. But he averaged a triple-double, which hadn't been done since Oscar Robertson did it like 50 years ago or more. So they gave him the MVP. I don't think he deserved it.
It was the
that
NBA's
year,
version of the Mike Trout, Miguel Cabrera Triple Crown year MVP, right?
Yep.
Where's
exactly,
the analytics versus the eye-popping stats sort of.
Right. LeBron could have won it that year again, because the thing too is I was the Harden year. Harden had a great year, but LeBron had better raw numbers because he played every game, and Harden missed like 12 games. So you can fight, all these. This is going to be an interesting one because there's literally 10 candidates, right? I mean,
yeah, but people have been dropping like flies off of it because
of the injuries,
not because of play. I mean,
and look,
LeBron slightly not because of his play, but because of the team's play.
The team's play, and let's not throw out one name that I threw in there a couple of times, Chris Paul. But that's more in terms of leadership, making those around you better, having an impact, like a true MVP.
Or like Luka Doncic. They've been playing
deserves
better
to be in there.
And you think his numbers certainly are worthy of it.
Jet, the last 2 months, they're 15-6, and he's shooting 42% from three. If Luka Doncic becomes a 42% shooter from three, holy hell, look out.
Well, the Celtics play him tomorrow, and he killed them earlier in the season he hit a buzzer beater three. He hit two, actually. He hit two in the last two possessions to beat the Celtics. On the year, Luka is averaging, let me take a look at this, Sap, if you give me just a second. He's averaging, I had him for a second, I lost him. I got it now, Sap. I've figured it out.
You're good at the computer.
28.5 points per game.
Yep.
9 assists and 8 rebounds. And he's 6th in the league in per. And like you said, you mentioned he's shooting the three ball a lot better. He's up to almost 37% on three this year now. Yeah,
I mean, if he crawls to 40% even, I mean, he shot 42% from three the last 2 months, and that's one of the reasons they're winning 3 out of every 4 games. And
he was the favorite at the beginning of the year. Preseason, he was the favorite to win MVP.
Yeah, and he's going to win this thing at some point, right? I mean, he's too good not to.
Yeah,
I think in a column I wrote on Full Press Coverage where I think Zion's going to be the face of the league. I also think that in like 3 or 4 years that Luka may be the best player in the league. The only problem with Luka is on the defensive end. He's really poor down there. And normally the great players, whether it be LeBron or Michael Jordan, these guys are great defensive players as well. Now, Bird and Magic weren't great defensive players, good team defenders. They also played on stacked teams, so they didn't necessarily have to play great defense. They had to they were almost like the free safety in football. They would kind of run everybody in front of them because they were smart defenders. Luka's a liability on defense. I think he can get better there. My concern with him is if he continues to improve as a three-point shooter and a free throw shooter, I predict now that this kid may become the all-time leading scorer in the history of the league, because I think LeBron's going to surpass Kareem. I think Durant's going to get there, but Durant's not durable enough to surpass the top 3. I think Luka could be the guy because he's so young and he's off to such a great start.
But he does have tread on his tires because he played in Europe.
He does. He's been playing professionally since he's 14, 15. And he doesn't look like he takes conditioning all that seriously.
No, I think somebody will break LeBron's probably, because I do think you're right. He'll end up breaking Kareem's. And the guy's coming to the NBA so ready now to score that I could see. I totally see where you're getting at too. Another name is, if the team was playing well, you'd have to consider Zion as an MVP front runner, but their team's not playing nearly good enough.
No,
he's averaging 26, 27 points a game this year, Sap. He's going to end up averaging over 30 for a couple of seasons in his career. He scores so easily. He also shoots an ungodly percentage from the floor because he just gets all of his baskets in the paint.
He just looks like the big kid playing with the little kids in middle school, doesn't he? Like, just get out of the way. I'm going to score. And I think he has an advantage, too, because he's left-handed. And I think James Harden has that same advantage. Sometimes when you're left-handed, you completely screw up the defense. You're just not used to playing left-handed players. I mean, there's scouting reports, so when you go up against Brooklyn and New Orleans, you know that those guys are left-handed, but it's not a natural reaction to try to cover the left hand. And again, I think he can become a decent perimeter shooter or a good perimeter shooter. He should become a decent three-point shooter. He's getting better at the free throw line. He's 20 years old, Jet.
He doesn't need to right now, too, because now they're playing him point guard, and he's getting up ahead of steam and just going to the basket. So they haven't needed him to stretch the floor. And with Harden, the lefty thing is confusing, like you said, because he's also got a deadly crossover, so
right.
he can do that. You can't force Zion right because he wants to go left, and he'll just physically move you.
Oh yeah,
There's no building a wall. There's no nothing.
No,
He's going where he wants to go. It's the same as LeBron in terms of he's just so physically imposing in that you can't come up with a defense to stop somebody who's bigger and stronger and faster and more athletic than everybody else. There's just nothing you can do about it. I mean, he dominated the Celtics last night. He went wherever the hell he wanted because
he was off.
Were pinging off of him, Sap.
And he was off. He was actually off. He missed like 5 layups in that game. He could have had.
It was like 37. The All-Star game. He missed a bunch of dunks, but
he missed some layups. Yeah, because he's just so big and strong. And I do. There is a comparison there, and I know I'm old here, and your dad will probably appreciate this. His game is a little bit the way Elgin Baylor played. Elgin Baylor went to the basket like that. Now, this was a different time. I get it. And Elgin wasn't 6'7", 285, but he was 6'5", 230. So back in the day, he was strong. He's just physically strong going to the basket. And you see that with Zion. What the Pelicans need, and again, we'll probably do this type of exercise in a future podcast, is take some really great players in the NBA and where their next destination should be, right? Players that are going to move on from their current franchise. We all agree Bradley Beal at some point is going to leave Washington unless he just loves playing there. Yeah. Maybe he just likes playing on a suck team and putting up big numbers. But could you picture Bradley Beal in New Orleans with Zion? That would be a perfect
I think it'd be great, but I don't think he'd want to go to New Orleans.
He wants to play with Jason Tatum, right? I mean, at some point, because they're buds. Well, maybe you could bring Zion here and Bradley Beal too. But Danny wouldn't make those moves if he had to put forth any first round.
No, but he'd be involved in the trade, and then we almost got him.
Right. Yeah, he's involved in the Zion trade, but I can't give up. I can't give up Marcus Smart for him. I know that's a sore subject with you, Jed. I apologize.
That's how it would go. Well, the Celtics don't have any MVP candidates this year, but maybe in the future. You never know, Sap. I don't feel great about it currently, but that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jed and Sap. We are, as always, presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out fullpresscoverage.com for all sorts of great podcasts and articles, some by our very own John Sapichetti, some by me. I'm going to start writing some articles. They, for some reason, decided to give me the password to the website to write articles. Bad decision. They're all going to be very nasty articles about the Celtics and the existential dread I feel about the Lakers Nets finals. That is inevitable. So make sure to check us out. We're also on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, YouTube/JetStryer. We tweet out the links at JohnSap25 at JetStryer. So check us out there, and we will be back later in the week. Make sure you stay tuned for when our latest podcast drops. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you later.